hope that disappears.
I'm sure it will.
Welcome to this discussion where we're going to talk about navigating mental health challenges as a family with scleroderma. We know that many families face emotional and mental health challenges when dealing with a complex illness like scleroderma. We have two excellent panelists today who are going to share some great information with us, as well as give us some tips and tools on coping with your child's condition. So let me first introduce them both to you. Suzanne Edison is a former therapist who serves as the mental health coordinator for the Cure Juvenile Myositis Foundation, and she's also the mother of a young adult who's in remission from juvenile myositis. She has been involved with Cure JM for 15 years and has led coping skills workshops for parents for many years. She also serves on the CARA Mental Health Task Force. In addition, Suzanne is an accomplished poet and the author of a book published this year. She also teaches reflective writing workshops to medical professionals and caregivers. Thank you for being here, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Also, we are very happy to have Ellen share with us today. Ellen is a seasoned mental health professional who has been a fierce advocate for families with rare diseases. Ellen's specialty is providing mental and emotional health services to rare disease communities by providing an interactive environment to tackle difficult subjects and provide the skills needed to manage life. Ellen is a board-certified licensed counselor who has more than 15 years of clinical experience. She also worked in patient advocacy at a large pharmaceutical company focused on rare diseases. Growing up, she saw her mom's 7-year journey to get a lupus diagnosis, and later, Ellen was her primary caregiver. Last year, Ellen founded her own nonprofit called Life Branches to provide free mental health services and other resources to rare disease patients. So before we get started, I just want to let you know we're going to divide our panel into two sessions. First of all, thank you both so much for being with us today and doing this panel to help our scleroderma families. I personally appreciate it very much. And we're going to first talk about caregivers, and then secondly, we're going to talk about kids. So we're going to get some insight into how to help ourselves first as stressed out moms and dads, and then secondly, how to help our kids. Suzanne, do you want to?
Yep. I hope all of you can see this. And thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. And thank you for having me. And Erin, thanks for that lovely invitation, or introduction, I should say. So I'm just gonna show you the agenda for today. We're gonna start with some poll questions, and then I'm gonna launch into talking about issues that we all face as caregivers. And then we're gonna look at some of the ways that we can help ourselves. So before I get started talking, I'm gonna, let's see if I can publish this poll. Oh, I don't know why that one closed. Let's see. Show on stage. Is that one working? Okay, and you all, I'm inviting you to interact with this poll. Do you sleep less well? It's maybe not showing up, huh? Are there any answers? Oh, here's a yes and a no. If you have an opportunity to click on your screen. Do you sleep less well since your child since you know, as a caregiver, since your child was diagnosed? And I'm not seeing that one come up, so I'm going to hide that one. I'm going to go to the next one. Let's see if this one shows up. I'm not seeing that. Show on stage. Let's see if this one works. Since diagnosis, have your eating habits or schedule and appetite changed? Yes. No. Okay. This one's looking like it's loading. Good. I have no idea how many people are in the audience, so I'm going to give this a second or two. Okay. Again, have your eating habits or schedule or appetite changed since your child was diagnosed, or since whomever you're caregiving was diagnosed? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. Let's see if I can launch it. I guess I can push publish. I'm not seeing it on the stage, so seem to be having a little bit of there it is. All right. Since diagnosis, do you feel overwhelmed by emotions, by grief, sadness, anger, irritability? Yes, no. If so, how often? Daily, weekly, they come and go. So, yes, no. If so, how often? Weekly, they come and go. Okay. Again, overwhelmed by feelings of irritability, grief, sadness, anger. If so, how often? Okay. Okay. And I think we'll end at that one, and I'll go back to my agenda here. And let me see if I can make this somewhat bigger. Yeah, there we go. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about many stages of grief and loss and acceptance and adjustment. So, one of the, I think, the big things that we all have, I'm going to go to this next slide. All parents set out with expectations, hopes, and dreams for their child. When a child is diagnosed with a health problem, these aspirations are altered. While one parent of a neurotypical child, for example, is hoping to see their child graduate from university, another parent is praying that their child can live pain-free. I mean, I also believe that we hope for our children to go on and live, quote unquote, a more normal life, perhaps, and going to college is definitely an option, I think, for many of our kids. But I think that in the process of, having this medical diagnosis, we still have to grieve the loss of that original hoped for fantasy of who they might be, who we might be as parents, who we might be as a family, etc. And I think once we can begin to really take on those feelings, and they aren't always you don't like grieve once and then you're through it and you move on. I think it's like an onion that you peel over and over again at different stages of their development, of different stages of parenting, different milestones or not meeting milestones. So there's this ongoing process of acceptance, hopefully, or really what I like to think of as adjustment. We all talk about a new normal, so an adjustment and then an acceptance of our new normal and moving forward. And I think we all can appreciate that having a medically ill child, so with chronic illness, that it creates changes in our family, in our friends, in our work lives, other networks. I think many of us have had the experience of, friends that we used to have who have, quote, more typical, neurotypical kids might fall away. It's very hard for them to understand. We might develop new friendships, particularly with people who are on the same sort of journey that we're on. I think sometimes too, it's just hard for other family members to understand until they've come into the house and lived with us for a day or more to see what it is that we are living with. So I think sometimes all of these relationships can be very strained and sometimes hard to ask for help. It's hard to accept that we need help, that we have needs. As parents, we believe that we should be doing everything all the time for our kids. And I think also it's hard for us to juggle taking care of ourselves when there might be other kids in the family. We might have partners, spouses, and much of this, particularly I think early in diagnosis, this sense of being overwhelmed can lead to a sense of hopelessness. We have this loss of control, this loss of sense of what we believed we had control. We believed we had control over some things, and I know for myself that was a big lesson in realizing that I had very little control over almost anything, even sometimes how I behaved. Like I couldn't control my feelings, but I might be able to control what came out of my mouth or how I acted. But even that took a lot of work and effort, and for me, a lot of therapy as well. So I also believe that acknowledging our helplessness might actually we might be able to um, stave off hopelessness, because I don't think hopelessness is the place that any of us want to be at all. We might have these moments for sure of despair and hope and hopelessness, but I'm hoping that we all can find ways to um, have moments of joy and just be with what is. Oftentimes, I know when our kids are in pain, that's a really difficult place for us to be. We'd hate to, no one likes to see their kids suffer. No one wants to have their kids in pain. That can really set up a lot of anxiety and just needing to find ways to help alleviate that. And finally, some of the changes that we might deal with are financial. We might have issues around insurance. We might need to quit our jobs. I know I did. Thankfully, I had a husband who was working and had health insurance, but that really led us to rethink our whole lives. What were we going to do? What was going to be important? How were we going to take care of our kid and make ends meet? So I know a lot of that is another stressor in our lives. So I don't think any of us would deny that having a medically ill kid provides a lot of stress. And I don't think any of us would deny that it creates anxiety. And there are often times where it also leads to depression. And we're going to look at these issues in a minute even more. And for many of us, even there's a sense, perhaps, if you've been caretaking for a while, things might get somewhat better. And so you have the sense of not being quite as vigilant, but something might happen. They have a flare or a relapse, and we're re-triggered. So we might have what people would consider post-traumatic stress disorder. Certainly well documented in other fields, people who have kids with cancer or heart issues. I am going to suggest that it is never really post-traumatic. I think it's ongoing stress, and it comes and goes higher and lower, and maybe over time it, settles into a low level. But again, something can trigger it to reoccur. And I think that we have to acknowledge too that there's happens a lot in our brain. So our high levels of emotion happen without our conscious awareness. It's the flight, fight, or freeze function happens in the limbic part of our brain, the old part of our brain, and that's normal. What is difficult and I think important is to begin to acknowledge and understand those feelings so that they don't interrupt our capacity to think clearly, to advocate for our kids, to find ways to help ourselves, to talk to our doctors, to um, do the research that we need to do to educate ourselves about the disease. So, finding ways to contain our high levels of emotion and anxiety, also not passing that anxiety on to our kids. Anxiety is very much a two-way street. So our anxiety can help, it can amp up their anxiety. So how do we find ways to contain it, to de-stress it? I'm not saying we're going to get rid of it. I'm just saying we're going to find ways to manage it. And then finally, moving towards coping skills. So here are some ways of thinking about anxiety and depression. I think is important to delineate the differences. And stress, can be helpful. It can move us forward, make us think about things that we need to, but it can also create a high levels of anxiety, feeling on edge or restless, thinking negatively about situations and things, finding difficulty concentrating, forgetfulness, difficulty with carrying out tasks and decision making. So those levels of higher levels of emotion that make it difficult for us to think and to move forward and to create plans. Creates muscle tension and soreness. We fatigue easily, might have sleep disturbances, persistent worrying, and feelings of panic or fear, uneasiness, again, irritability. It certainly can change our breathing and our uh, blood pressure. If we're not careful, I think some of us can easily move into depression, persistent sadness, feelings of hopelessness, feelings of guilt and worthlessness. I think guilt is a big one for many of us. Did I cause this in my child? Was there something that I wasn't paying attention to? Is it in my genetics, etc.? I'm here to tell you that it took me a very long time to get through that guilt and to realize that underneath for me, the guilt, there was just a lot of feelings of like, oh, I can't control very much of anything, and that makes me feel helpless, and I hate those feelings. So if I were feeling guilty, I would think there'd be something I might do or might have done to control the situation. But in reality, there wasn't. Here are some of the other issues about depression, and hopefully, if you are having any of these feelings of depression, which again I think can be very normal, I'm hoping that you will find ways, we can talk about them for sure, of getting help, finding a therapist for yourself, finding therapists for the family. Family therapy can be very helpful. And there's absolutely no shame either in a pharmacological approach to depression. It doesn't have to be something that a medication that you stay on for forever. Sort of racing through these things, so I really want to leave time for questions at the end, but I also want to talk about coping and hoping and putting on your mask first. That's the quote that all of the airline people say to you, right, when they are talking about safety and what happens if the mask drops down and you need oxygen. So I know people use this a lot. It can become a cliche after a while, but I think it's really, really important. If your well is empty, if you are exhausted, it's really hard to take care of anybody else. So, what are some of the ways of managing stress and anxiety? Paying attention. So, mindfulness, meditation, learning some breathing techniques. There are a variety of them. Yoga, visualizing yourself in this little um, scenario. This person is seeing themselves at a beach. Where is your place that makes you feel calmer and allows you to relax? Moving on to expressive and creative strategies. I mean, I was a writer and poet before my child got sick, but in the process, we got the diagnosis, and after a few months, I realized I hadn't been writing, and I really needed to write. And all of a sudden, these floodgates opened, and I started just writing about my journey. And it didn't really matter whether I was writing for anybody else or not. It was really for me to keep that writing, and that's sort of under the reflection and exploration. But I think any of the expressive arts, whether it's painting or dancing or music or working in the garden. I'm also a big gardener. I love to grow flowers, and it's very soothing and meditative for me. And any kind of physical movement, maybe you put on some music and you dance in your living room, or for me, again, I used to be a big swimmer. Going to the pool was totally unworkable, but I could walk out the back door and go around the block, or I could, have a 15-minute break and go for a short walk. Or in the best of circumstances, I might have a friend come over and give me a half an hour to an hour break. So anything to get the high levels of cortisol that your anxiety produces, getting it to move through your body and find some calm and relaxation. Again, also helping us be able to think more clearly. So again, moving to sort of reflection and exploration strategies. Maybe you're somebody who loves to have a checklist of things. I'm going to make sure I get 6 hours of sleep at night. I'm going to eat healthily. I'm going to check, check. I'm going to take a 15-minute break, check. I'm going to sit in my room for 5 minutes and do nothing, check. I'm going to lie on the couch for 5 minutes and do nothing, check. Um, Learning to communicate about your feelings and about what's going on, I think, is a really, really important piece of how we manage what we're going through. And if you have a partner or a spouse, really important. I think I've gone to a number of different workshops where both they've separated men and dads and moms and women. And if you're non-binary, then that's going to be an issue for you to figure out which group you belong in. But we know that, from lots of research that men and women tend to communicate differently about their stresses and anxieties. So finding ways to communicate with your partner or with other people who are helping caregive, or even just with other family members, really important. And last and certainly not least, a healthy lifestyle, exercise, relationships, nutrition, eating well, etc. And then here and last are a few resources you might want to look at. The CureJM website, I've put lots and lots of resources on there. While it's juvenile myositis, it is very similar to scleroderma with the kinds of medications and issues that we all face. There's another website about self-care for parents with chronically ill children. This book, I think, is quite helpful. And then another website for kids and caregivers. And again, many other resources on my site, our site, the CureJM site. So I'm going to stop presenting and really open it up for any questions at this point. Not sure I see questions, so maybe I need. Okay. And if not, you might think of them as we're going along, and you can put them in the chat, and we can always come back to them at the end. Someone said, what about feeling guilt for taking time for yourself? I think that is a big one. Again, I keep coming back to, if your well is empty, how are you going to be there for anybody else? So I know it feels bad in our culture as a mom, as a primary caregiver, whether you're a mom or dad, it's always about everybody else. And all I could say is, think about how is that guilt serving you? You know, and that's what it took me a long time to understand, that the guilt that I had about not taking time for myself or about my kid's illness was a way of avoiding acknowledging something else that was underneath that guilt. And that was a sense of helplessness. And once I got hold of that, and once I got a sense of, if I really need to do this for myself so that I can be there better for my child, things got better. How helpful was it for you to connect with other caregivers of children with CureJM? That was crucial. So, Dr. Lee asked about connecting with other families of caregivers with JM. A lifeline. Seriously, I was at a breaking point after about 4 or 5 months, and I kept reaching out to my, um, medical team and saying, "I need to find somebody else, and I have to talk to somebody who's been on this journey." And she was a lifeline for me, truly and truly. And then I found the whole CureJM network, and I have been involved with them for 15 years now, and it has been a huge support system for me. Does it help to find advocacy outlet? Yes, and that's Erin's question. I think that finding a way to give back or to feel like you can do something, even if it doesn't immediately help your child, if you're advocating for kids in general, if you're helping to raise money for research, if you're providing workshops for other people in whatever your specialty is, I think that's a way of hope, of finding a moment, pieces of hope because we all need those we need those connections with each other.
This has been wonderful. I wish I had met you like 7 years ago, and I really, really needed to hear this when Ansley was first diagnosed, and I kind of spun into a year of, extraordinarily difficult, kind of dark times. And looking back on it now, I realize I think things were pretty rough. So this is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. And you'll still be here. So if we have more
Right.
questions that pop up, specifically focused on caregivers, we will catch you. So thank you. And I think Ellen is still.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, everyone. Um, so my presentation today is primarily from a mental health aspect, and I the things that I'm going to discuss today can be just as pertinent for adults as it can for kids. So keep that in mind as I'm going through everything. So let me pull this up. Okay. Is my screen okay, Karen? Trying to see to get it. Yes? Okay, good. You can see everything? It's not, let me see. Full screen. There we go. Okay. All right. Let's get started. So, um, basically, psychological pain is a lot of what both caregivers and kids feel that are suffering anyway from any type of medical issue. And the problem or the challenge that we usually face is that we want to do what we've always done, and that's figure it out, fix it, and try to get rid of it. But unfortunately, a rare disease cannot be fixed. And so a lot of times trying to get rid of your emotional pain will actually amplify that physical pain. So, the six keys to mental health that everyone needs, regardless of age, is meaning and purpose, quality sleep, brain healthy diet, social connection, staying active, and managing stress. And so, as I said, no matter how old you are, we all need to incorporate all of these elements into our life. And it's really important to think about the mind body connection because this is the part I think that a lot of people don't pay attention to. We think about our body physically and we think about our brain and emotions separately. But chronic pain and stress are linked. And as Suzanne was just mentioning, stress is a key contributor to acute pain becoming chronic pain. Because what happens is your body realizes that you're facing challenges. And then what happens in your body is your cortisol level rises. When your cortisol level rises, that sends a message through the nervous system to your brain. And then it becomes a cycle of anxiety. And now it's kind of what's causing what? Are your thoughts causing it? Is it coming from your physical aspect. So it's really important to think about how you think about things and how you can respond to that stress to reduce that anxiety and the cortisol level that's rising in our body. So here's one of the things that I think is most important for kids is, we all know feelings, happy, sad, all the basics. But there's many more emotions that we feel. And the difficulty is sometimes we don't know how to describe what we're feeling. And a lot of times that's what happens with the kids. And so one of the critical things to do with your kids is to have them name the emotion. And of course, depending on the age, it's going to vary. But see if you can get if it's anger. Okay, well, what is that? Anger can be a lot of things. Is it being annoyed? Is it being frustrated, offended, mad, threatened? And sometimes, if you can help the child identify and name that emotion, they can learn how to control that emotion better. And this is just an example of what our stress response cycle does when we, experience a difficult event, we get stressed, their adrenaline and cortisol levels start flowing. A lot of times then there will be physical aspects, our head hurts, heart starts racing, we get short of breath, then our muscles tense up. And that whole cycle is what then increases the pain and actually makes it worse. So I've identified 7 amplifiers of pain. And these 7 are, there's a lot of other ones, but these are the critical 7 that usually amplify any type of pain. And that would be stress, anger, bitterness, fear, anxiety, sadness, and loneliness. So when any of these emotions are triggered, and someone is not feeling well, it's going to exacerbate the physical part of the symptoms. And as Suzanne mentioned before, stress produces depression. And what happens, that we feel hopeless. We don't want to take part in everyday life. We shut down. And if it gets bad, it can last for weeks, months, years. So here's the good part. The brain is neuroplastic. So a while back, a long time ago, it was felt that once the brain was formed, that was it. There was nothing else you could do. But then through research, neuroscientists found out that that is not true, that the brain is actually neuroplastic because it reproduces new cells and new thoughts on a continual basis. And so, what I teach a lot in therapy to both adults and children is when you change how you think, you can actually change your brain structure and chemistry. And that's been proven. And so, when you change that, when you change your thoughts, it will actually change how you feel physically. And so the biggest part in dealing with any kind of medical issue is called what I call developing emotional resilience. Individuals that can develop emotional resilience can usually have a higher pain tolerance. They can manage their life better and actually be happier. And so basically, it's the way we think and then the way we analyze and evaluate things. And then that leads us to our behavior or action and the way we react to it. So instead of judging emotions, we want to describe them. So we're not in control of our thoughts. Our thoughts are going a mile a minute. Our body is giving us different sensations, but we are actually in control of what we think. And instead of just saying something is good or bad, it's very helpful to start to teach that instead of saying this is bad or this is negative, that this is uncomfortable, this is painful, this is difficult. And when you say those words, it actually has a different impact on the brain and therefore what is felt physically. So I've outlined a couple, three different types of skills that you can try to use. Not, again, not only for yourself, but for your children. But it's been shown that if we can separate our thoughts away from ourselves, then we have a better ability to change our thoughts. And that's where the neuroplasticity comes in. So, for example, let's say I'm a negative thinker and I think negative all the time, and I name those negative thoughts, say Billy Bob. So, anytime during the day when I have a negative thought, I'll say to myself, "Oh, there's Billy Bob. He's back in my brain. Nope, got to let him go. No time to think like that." And it's interesting that if you do that consistently and regularly, you will actually change the way the synapses and neurotransmitters in your brain actually work together. Another skill is singing in silly voices. So you can take a thought that seems really strong. So let's say I can't go, your child says, I can't go to the party because I'm feeling very anxious. So a good trick to use, again, depending on the age, is to use weird voices to say the thought out loud. And then by talking in funny voices, low voice, radio announcer voice, British accent, and then if you even actually start to sing it, it will actually start to reduce that anxiety and therefore the pain level in your body. A third skill that you can use is what's called putting thoughts on an object. And basically, what this is, it's saying if one of your children are constantly have a negative thought like "I'm not lovable," then you can take an object, and usually it's if it's fairly heavy, it's a little bit better. So it has a little more impact. And then, so let's say you use a heavy rock, then you carry that rock around until you don't believe that thought anymore. Because while you're holding that heavy rock, you are conscious of still saying, I'm not lovable. And there is an interaction when you actually, in your brain, when you put down the rock, you're actually saying to your brain, okay, I'm not going to think that way anymore. So it's a way to represent having a thought versus buying a thought. So in the end, we all know that the journey that our kids and caregivers are on, we can only take one step at a time. Um, and I just want to leave with a thought that I think is really important to never allow yourself to believe that because you can't do it all, that it's not worth it to do anything. And that's what's defined in in therapy, psychology is cognitive distortions. And so we tend to say, okay, well, if I can't do the whole thing, then I'm not going to do anything. And so that's a mindset that will really help yourself and your children if you try to change that. And that's it. So let's open it up for questions. There it goes. Okay. Um, Not sure. I think those were for Suzanne. Erin, are you seeing any that I'm
Sorry, I
missing?
wasn't on, I couldn't talk to you. I think there was a question about kind of those 6 areas that you brought up in the very beginning. There was that slide with like the one about having a sense of purpose, having social
Okay,
connection. Like,
okay.
how do you sort of find the balance between those 6 areas, or is it okay to, pick a couple that work for you and focus on those? And how would you approach that?
Well, all of them are important. The challenge is when you have a physical illness, it's really hard to maintain all of those in your life. I would say you just do the best that you can in seeing what you can pull out from each of those aspects to make sure that your child has at least a little bit of each in their life, because a lot of each is kind of intertwined. And it's really hard if, let's say, you do some of them but then you're not taking care of social isolation. Then if you're not taking and doing some things for that piece, it's going to have an effect on all the other pieces. So, Suzanne, do you have any other comments?
No, I think you've covered it quite well. I was noticing that Suzanne Lee has a question in the chat about how long do you think it takes for an adolescent patient to learn one of the techniques you suggested, and which do you think is the easiest to learn?
The easiest one, the one I use most of the time in my therapy practice, is the naming it. And I can say for myself personally, I have done it and it works. So I used to be a really negative thinker. And the problem with that, it would lead me into a depression, especially when my mom was sick and I was taking care of her. And so I realized I could, this is not a way to live my life. And so don't ask me why, but my name was Dolores. And so I would talk to Dolores all the time. And when Dolores would come into my head, I say, Dolores, you need to leave. Okay. We're not having coffee today. Not gonna, I don't want to talk to you today. You need to leave my head. And as I constantly did that, it actually did rewire my brain. So instead of my brain automatically being locked into the negativity, I was able, since our brain is neuroplastic, I was able to start to break that. And I have to say, honest, I'm not just saying it. I very rarely have a negative thought, and if I do, I just talk to Dolores again. And so I think no matter what age, um, it can be very young, and teach them to have a name for whether it's, negative thinking, or a lot of times it's thinking in the future. Oh my gosh, what's my life going to be like? And how am I going to do this? And all those what ifs that we do to ourselves. Well, the kids are doing the same thing mentally in their head. And so again, if you talk to it, um, you can actually start rewiring and change your brain.
I also think
Absolutely.
that concretizing the illness with a name, like I have a friend whose son had brain cancer and he called Frank. And then we had Frank Busters everywhere. And he made rocks with Frank Busters, and we made T-shirts with Frank Busters, and and Frank was doing this and Frank was doing that, and you could get mad at Frank. It didn't have to be you specifically. So I think for younger kids particularly, I think making it's sometimes hard to get them to listen to what's going on in their heads, but if you can make it more concrete, and then it can be externalized in a way, and then you can, as a parent, you can also begin to understand how they're experiencing it. And one of the questions that came up in the chat was about giving kids shots and how hard that was for parents. And so one of the things I think, I made a lot of answers in the chat, but one of the things I think is important about concretizing is also how do you give them some measure of control in a situation where they have so little control? We know we have so little control. Think about what it's like for them, even more so. So having a way to concretize their illness. I also have, as kids get older, and I teach a lot of workshops for kids, is having them write a letter to their disease so they can name it. It could be Frank, it could be Dolores or whatever. Dear Dolores, or dear Scleroderma, this is what I hate about you. This is what happens for me, so that, again, it's finding a way to give them a little bit of separation and distance so it's not all of who they are. And I think that's another piece of acknowledging as a parent, their illness is not all of who they are. And we really have to feed the other parts of them as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love the naming the thoughts one. That's fantastic. As soon as you said that, I was thinking to myself, I'm going to start doing that for me. But I also think for my non-scleroderma kid, it could be very effective. Even like the little league team that I'm coaching, they're little and they're like striking out and they melt down. They're crying. They're so like upset, and then they get up again and they can't clear it out of their head, and they're just like, I'm going to strike out again. And so I think really any kid could benefit from these. These are
and that's if you tie in the feelings wheel, and you actually can help them name that emotion. Then they can tie that name to the emotion, and that's very, very healthy from an emotional standpoint. So again, instead of just saying I'm angry, that there's a difference. If a child says I'm frustrated, then a parent can, when you identify that different than just a broad anger, it helps a parent then understand what the emotion is. So teaching them to name the emotion, and then use a name to call that emotion broadly is very, very helpful.
Let's see if there's anything
I have
else.
A kid who actually, even as a therapist, was not willing to use those emotion words at all. And so we had to just do a lot of play therapy together. And I let her, she would give her dolls shots. She would wrap their arms with things. She would say they had XYZ and they were never going to recuperate. And I was saying, well, what would make them feel better? And, so that was a way that we developed the language together. Sometimes she would actually have to give me a shot, pretending with a paper clip. So, as much. And that was when she was younger. And as she got older, and I think it's harder with teenagers because another piece of what's difficult is they want to be separating from you, right? And at the same time, they still need you. And that's in any normal relationship, but it's extra difficult with a kid who's medically ill. And so there's that constant sort of tug of war, push pull. I need you. I don't want to need you. And I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to tell you how I'm feeling. And so if they have that other part that you could say, well, maybe don't talk to me, but you could write a letter to this person, or talk to Dolores or whoever you've named it. And, so that you're at least giving them permission and space and acknowledgement that, it's difficult and you're still here for them. I think that's the hardest part, is to just keep acknowledging that, this life is hard, but you're here no matter what, even if they hate you at that moment.
Yeah, I think the play therapy is a good point, Suzanne, and it reminds me of something that I'd like to just share with if there are any other families here on the call listening, is don't feel boxed into finding a psychologist to take your child to if they need help. That might not be a fit. That wasn't a fit for our daughter. We tried 2-3 different psychologists where you sit in an office and they want to talk to her and help her, and she hated it. It didn't work. And then we tried a woman she's not a psychologist, but she's a social worker, and she works at a barn. She works with horses. The kids are outside. And it was a game changer completely for her because she connected and she wanted to go. And so I just, just keep an open mind. It might be horses, it might be yoga, it might be art, it might be play. It doesn't have to be sit in a chair and talk to me about your feelings.
So I see there's two more questions. One is, I find I'm always minimizing myself. I shouldn't feel this way. Others have it worse. What can I do to change that? I'm thinking that's a parent asking that question. I could take it on, but I'll also ask Ellen. Um, when my daughter was first diagnosed, a friend of mine said, "Oh, I'm going to do a meal chain for you." And I was like, "Oh, no big deal. She's not going to die. She doesn't have cancer." And then she went ahead and did the meal chain anyway. And I was in tears because I realized all of my friends wanted to help. They had absolutely no idea what to do or how to be helpful. But if they could make a meal and bring it over to the house, um, it actually helped our relationships quite a lot. I mean, I feel like that's been my issue with other people, but how do you stop that minimizing voice in your head, right? How do you say other people have it worse? Well, that's everybody. We're on a continuum of experience, right? Does that mean that your experience is not valid? I think that's the question I would always have to ask myself. Um, yes, other people might have it worse, and not but, and this is the reality that I'm living with, and I need to be taking care of my child and myself and my family, and this is how I'm gonna do it because this is the best I know how to do at this moment in time.
Mhm.
Ellen, do you have another thought about that?
No, but I just saw another question about how to handle a child who denies any issue, won't talk about their feelings or thoughts. Yeah, the again, Suzanne said some of that in her presentation is journaling and writing is really good. And what I would recommend you do is, and you can find it, just go Google, do a Google image search on, it's called the feelings wheel, and actually have a printout of that so the child can then start to learn what is the emotion that they're feeling. And a lot of times writing it out, and just putting it on paper is very cathartic. So they might not be able to verbalize it, but if they can at least get it out on paper, that usually is extremely helpful.
Yeah, I also have put it in the chat. I have a resource on the CureJM website I found for ways that give prompts for journaling. So they have all these lovely little questions, kind of a little bit like ad libs, but not quite, for kids at different ages. So that it's, there's for younger kids and then there's for adolescents. And we also have it, there's a Spanish translation as well. The emotion wheel is a little bit like that pain scale, which I hate and don't get me started. But but all the different faces, right? And so there are these actually books for kids from very early on that have different, and for kids who have autism, I think there's some really great um, resources. So it helps them to be able to name the feelings, and if it's a teenager, uh, they probably don't wanna share with you regardless.
Mhm.
So, having them put it, in their journal and I don't know. It's, at some point, they'll have to come back and deal with it, and we don't get to control at what point they do that. We can
Mhm.
just be there and offer them resources and help and guidance, um, and I love that there are all these options like horseback riding and play therapy, and there's so many other ways of managing your feelings and the stress for the kids
Mhm.
and your own. I mean,
Mhm.
I know adults who are doing horseback riding therapy. So,
I think one of the most important lessons to teach is that, and it's true with anyone, regardless of age, is we allow our thoughts to control us. And, we're not really ever taught that, our thoughts lie to us all the time, but what we believe, what they tell us. And that's what gets us in trouble. But most people don't realize they do have control over their thinking, and ways like naming it, and other different ways, visualization. There's all sorts of techniques, but realizing and letting a child know they do have control, that if they're thinking a certain way, whether it's negative thinking, or doing what if, or whatever type of cognitive distortion it is, they can control it and change it.
I put the CureJM website link in the chat. I also put my own personal. The CureJM website link is the one that would have the resources. And Ellen, you might have a link to some resources too. So.
This is wonderful. Thank you
Anything
both
else?
so much. Let me see if there's anything else that we're...
Okay.
Any other chats here? I don't see anything else. Was there anything else that you guys wanted to bring up, or anything else that we didn't touch on that you wanted to mention?
I just want to thank everybody for coming and for inviting me to be here and allowing me to speak. And again, I hope you do find other people on the journey. I think this kind of a conference is so important, and I hope one day you all can come back together in person. I know that at CureJM, we're going to actually try to have another in-person conference. It's a crucial event, but maybe you can find ways in your chat rooms to meet each other and connect one-on-one. Again, I think it's very important for parents to find other people on the same journey, because that's who understands you the most.
I agree, for sure.
Thank you, Ellen, too, for your great hints. I would love to know if our PDFs will be circulated or not, and if people want them.
I was going to ask. I'm not sure. They'll be posted somewhere. They can. I'd be more than happy. If
Yeah,
Scleroderma.
that's a great idea. Let's ask if we can find a way to make that happen, because I think those are full of really great resources for families. And I know you guys put a lot of time and effort into that, so we appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, well, thank you both so much. And thank you to our families and everybody who came today and listened in.
Okay.
We'll see you all at the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Take care. Thank you.
Fantastic.